Today I'm going to be reviewing the book Crime and Punishment, written by Fyodor Dostoevsky. It was published in 1866, and Dostoevsky is known as one of the best Russian writers. He's even called a Russian Shakespeare. Now, if you have not read this book, I would not recommend watching this video because there are spoilers ahead. This video is for readers who have read the book to kind of get a better understanding of characters and themes and stuff like that. The premise of Crime and Punishment involves a former university student named Raskolnikov who ends up committing a murder, killing an old pawnbroker and her sister. And it kind of goes over the punishment of that crime, hence the title of the book. And it's really interesting because it's told from the murderer's point of view, so we get an insight into the dark human nature and the struggle that goes on in his mind, and kind of the effect of guilt and sin that caused the confession at the end of the book. As mentioned before, the narrator in our book is Raskolnikov, and other main characters include Razumikin, who is a family friend, Dunya, who is Raskolnikov's sister, Porfiry, who is the detective on the case, and then two of my favorite characters, and I think most interesting characters, are Sonia, who is a young prostitute who takes care of her family, and Savid Regalov, who is the villain in our novel. Now, because Dostoevsky tells the story through the viewpoint of our murderer, Raskolnikov, we can see that there is such a struggle in his mind, and Raskolnikov deals with double-mindedness, and even before he commits the murder, he goes back and forth between whether he should do it or not. Many times in the beginning of the novel, we see that he decides to kill the pawnbroker and is very determined, and then he'll change his mind immediately and say he can't do it. He's disgusted at the thought. And that is just an example that continues throughout the book of the struggle in Raskolnikov's mind and the double-mindedness that he feels. And I believe that Sonia and Savid Regalov are representatives of this double-mindedness. And Sonia represents kind of the redemption side, the confession side of his thoughts. And she kind of leads him to his confession because she's a savior figure. And Savid Regalov really represents the evil in his mind, and he really represents the extraordinary man that Raskolnikov talks about in his theories. Focusing on Sonia, we see that she is the best character in the book that can relate to having two selves. She's a very religious, faith-filled woman, while at the same time works as a prostitute to help support her family, so it's more out of desperation and responsibility than anything. And we see Raskolnikov relating to this because he himself has two selves, but he is frustrated with her because of her job as a prostitute, and actually in the book, in frustration, yells at her and says, "You won't save anybody this way, you aren't helping anybody," which I think is very important to note because he accuses her of a crime that she's committing and says she won't help anybody, she won't save anybody, while at the same time Raskolnikov has committed a crime and he's not accusing himself of not saving anybody, not helping anybody, and he's committed just as bad of a crime as she does, and he believes that he did it for utilitarianism purposes and that he did it for the best of the majority of the people, and still accuses Sonia of not being able to save people. Because Raskolnikov can relate to Sonia, Claire Carroll from Providence College said that Sonia is the human presence that Raskolnikov finds consolation in. And I think that's very true because Sonia is the only person that Raskolnikov confesses to, and he sees her as living with a crime that she's committed but still living with it and still having faith through it. And he doesn't really understand how she does that, so he finds consolation and comfort in her because he wants to know how she lives with the crime that she commits. So we can really see Sonia as our savior figure in the novel, and in the end I believe it is Sonia's influence on Raskolnikov as to why he confessed and found absolution in confessing. On the other hand, we have Savid Regalov, who represents Raskolnikov's shadow self, and he really represents the extraordinary man that Raskolnikov writes about in his article. He has really gotten away with some of the crimes that he has committed, really emphasizing that he is above human law, that he doesn't have to follow the morality, and he really is the exceptional, extraordinary man that Raskolnikov desires to be, and it kind of represents what his theories would look like in real life, and it's not a happy picture. We meet Savid Regalov in the novel right after Raskolnikov wakes up from a nightmare. So it's almost as if that Savid Regalov is a living, continuous nightmare in Raskolnikov's life. And speaking of nightmares, Raskolnikov has 3 nightmares throughout the novel, and Savid Regalov has 3 nightmares in one night, and this kind of links them, and these nightmares prove that Savid Regalov is tormented and haunted by the things he's done as well, which ultimately leads him to suicide at the end of his story in the book. And I really believe that Raskolnikov would have followed in his footsteps by killing himself because of the guilt and torment that he felt had he not confessed because of Sonia's influence. A critic, R.E. Richardson, calls Savid Regalov a comic hero, which I have to disagree with because I don't see Savid Regalov as comical or as a hero. In fact, Raskolnikov calls Savid Regalov himself a vicious, vile creature, and I see him as more evil than a hero than anything else. So it's very evident that these two characters are really what Raskolnikov wants and desires to be. Sonia is what Raskolnikov wants to be on the spiritual, religious side, and Savid Regalov is what Raskolnikov wants to be on the extraordinary man, the exceptional man side. So we see really how torn Raskolnikov is in his mind as these two figures represent what's going on in his mind. But in the end, we see that Raskolnikov can really only find absolution in his crimes through spiritual needs, and that's by confessing and by Sonia's influence on his life, especially after telling the story of Lazarus coming back to life to Raskolnikov when he confesses to her. Lastly, I think it's important to note that Raskolnikov never says his theories in his article were incorrect. He never doesn't believe them. He just accepts the fact that he failed to be the extraordinary man that he still thinks is a possibility. And one last thing, and one kind of important fact, is Raskolnikov in Russian actually means division. So it's kind of interesting to see that he himself really is divided, and it even shows in his name. And this is just another reason why Dostoevsky is one of the best Russian writers. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I hope you have a great day.